Summer Game Fest 2026 is officially over, and after nearly 3 hours of announcements, trailers, world premieres, and surprise reveals, I think it is fair to say that this was one of the strongest Summer Game Fest lineups we have seen in years. Now, I don't think it was a perfect showcase. There were still plenty of cinematic trailers. Some games showed up without release dates, and there were definitely a few stretches where the pacing slowed down. But unlike some previous years, where one or two major announcements carried the entire event, this year's show felt consistently strong from beginning to end. On screen right now is every major announcement from SGF 2026, along with release dates and confirmed platforms were available. There was also an entire day of the devs presentation packed with indie games, but we are not going to cover that. And for this video, we are going to focus specifically on the main SGF showcase. Rather than rushing through every announcement, we are going to focus on 10 of the biggest reveals from the show. So let's get started. The very first major reveal of the show was Resident Evil Veronica, finally bringing one of the most requested Resident Evil remakes into the spotlight after years of rumors, leak, and fan speculation. Originally released in 2000 as Resident Evil Code Veronica, the game follows Claire Redfield as she continues searching for her brother Chris. That search eventually leads her to Rockford Island and into another nightmare involving Umbrella, biological weapons, and the Ashford family. Despite being one of the most important series in the Resident Evil timeline, Veronica has often been overshadowed by the numbered series, which is why fans have been asking Capcom to revisit it for years. What interesting about Veronica is that this isn't just a side story, it fills a major gap in the Resident Evil timeline and plays an important role in the journey of both Claire and Chris Redfield. For longtime fans, this remake has been one of the most requested projects in the franchise, and after years of speculation, it is finally happening. The trailer itself didn't reveal much gameplay, but it immediately established the tone Capcom appears to be aiming for. Rockford Island looked darker, more atmospheric, and far more unsettling than its original incarnation. Claire and Chris both received updated design, and everything shown had the visual quality people have come to expect from the RE engine. In many ways, this announcement felt inevitable. Capcom remake strategy has been one of the company's biggest successes over the last decade. The second remake was a massive hit, the third one sold well despite some criticism, and the fourth one became one of the most acclaimed entries in the entire series. Because of that, many fans expected Capcom to move directly to the fifth one, but instead the company chose to remake Veronica first, which makes a lot of sense if they are continuing to modernize the series for new player. Capcom has also confirmed a 2027 release window for PS5, Xbox X and S, PC, and Nintendo Switch. While we still haven't seen substantial gameplay, and there are plenty of questions about how some of the original game location, bosses, and story moments will be adapted. This was an incredibly strong way to open the showcase. And if Capcom can deliver the same level of quality we have seen from its recent remake, Veronica could easily become one of the biggest releases of 2027. More than a decade after the original terrified players, Creative Assembly is finally returning to the world of isolation. And judging by the reaction at SGF, this was one of the reveals horror fans have been waiting for years to see. Released in 2014, the original Isolation earned a reputation as not only one of the best alien games ever made, but one of the best survival horror games. Much of that came down to the xenomorph itself. Unlike most horror enemies that follows scripted routines, the alien felt unpredictable and intelligent, adapting to players' behavior and constantly forcing players to change their approach. Even today, its AI remains one of the most talked about features in horror gaming. The reveal trailer immediately suggested a much larger scale than the original game. Instead of Sevastopol Station, players will now explore Kurosaki Station and a remote colony environment that appears significantly bigger than anything we have seen in the first game. The atmosphere was strong from the start, with signs that something had gone horribly wrong before the players arrive. According to early details, the sequel will feature larger environment, more exploration opportunities, and areas beyond the claustrophobic corridors that defined much of the first game. Some reports have even suggested that the parts of the game will take place on the colony world surface, potentially creating entirely new survival scenarios. The biggest question is, however, remains the xenomorph. Creative Assembly has reported that they have developed a new version of this AI system specifically for the sequel, and that's arguably the most important detail revealed so far. The original alien is still considered one of the gaming's most memorable enemies, so successfully evolving that system could be the key to making the sequel something special. There are still plenty of unanswered questions, especially regarding combat, story details, and how the sequel will expand on the original. But honestly, Creative Assembly don't need to show everything. The fact that this exists is kind of good enough. After more than 10 years of waiting, one of gaming's greatest horror experiences is finally getting a sequel. One of the biggest surprises of SGF was Crossfire, a brand new IP that immediately became one of the games that I started playing the closest attention to. At first glance, this looked like the kind of big budget cinematic action game that used to dominate the showcases during the 360 and the PlayStation 3 era. The story follows two operatives on opposite sides of a global conflict who are forced into an uneasy alliance after uncovering a conspiracy that threatens both factions. It's a familiar premise, but the presentation kinda stood out. The production value, the character models, performance, and the action sequences carried a level of polish that many new franchises struggle to achieve during their first reveal. Once you learn who's making the game, that quality will start to make a lot more sense. Crossfire is being developed by That's No Moon, a studio founded by veterans from Naughty Dog, Infinity Ward, Bungie, and Sony Santa Monica. These are the teams behind franchises like Uncharted, Last of Us, Call of Duty, Halo, Destiny, and God of War. So expectations are naturally high. What really caught my attention though was the gameplay. The gunplay looks weighty, the animations were smooth, and several action sequences hinted at a dynamic cover system that could become this game's defining mechanic. While we still need a deeper gameplay breakdown before drawing any major conclusions, the foundation looks really promising. New IP always face a tougher challenge because they don't have an established fan base behind them. First impression matters. Crossfire delivered one of the strongest first impression of the entire showcase. It wasn't the biggest announcement of the SGF, but it may have been one of the most captivating ones. I've already talked about Resonant during my state of play coverage, but every time Remedy shows this game, it somehow climbs higher on my most anticipated list. The latest trailer focused heavily on Dylan Faden, who appears to be taking central stage this time around, while also giving us another look at this strange shifting architecture. What really elevated the reveal was the presentation. Remedy has become one of the best studios in the industry when it came to atmosphere, and this trailer was the perfect example of that. The music, editing, visuals, and overall tone came together incredibly well, creating one of the strongest trailers shown during the entire showcase. The gameplay also continues to look fantastic. The original Control already had featured some of the most satisfying telekinetic combat in modern gaming, and Resonant appears to be expanding on those ideas in every direction. The destruction looks more advanced, environments react more dynamically, melee combat seems more impactful, and the new shape-shifting weapon system could become one of the game's coolest mechanics. What gives me confidence is Remedy's recent track record between Control, Alan Wake 2, and the larger connected universe they are building. The studio has consistently delivered experiences that feels unique in an industry where many AAA games can start blending together. That confidence was reinforced by the hands-on preview released after the SGF. Early impressions praise the expanded combat system, larger environments, and overall design, with many suggesting that Remedy understands exactly what made the original Control special and is focusing on building upon those strengths rather than reinventing them. The story remains mysterious, the FBC is still as weird as ever, and the reality continues to break in an increasingly strange way. But everything shown around those elements looks bigger, more ambitious, and more polished. At this point, Resonant is in one of my most anticipated game of the year. If Remedy delivers on what they have shown so far, it could easily end up becoming one of the year's strongest game of the year contenders. Now, this was the announcement that genuinely made me stop and think wait, this is actually still happening. After years of silence, delays, and all the uncertainty around Telltale, The Wolf Among Us 2 is finally being resurfaced at SGF 2026. And while the trailer didn't reveal a huge amount of information, it did confirm something important. The game still feels like the first one. Bigby Wolf is back, the dark neon noir atmosphere is still intact, and the trailer leaned heavily into the moody, character driven storytelling that made the original game so memorable. What makes this reveal significant isn't necessarily what was shown, but the fact that the project has survived at all. For years, many fans assumed the game had quietly disappeared following Telltale's collapse, and for the long period without meaningful updates. The good news is that Telltale now has confirmed a 2027 release window for the sequel. The studio has also announced a remaster of the original game arriving later this holiday season, giving both new and returning players a chance to revisit Fabletown before the sequel launches. There are still plenty of questions surrounding the project, and expectations are much higher than they were back in 2013. But after spending so much time in development, The Wolf Among Us 2 is finally feels real again. And for a lot of fans watching SGF, that alone was enough to make it one of the most memorable reveals of the show. Another notable appearances during SGF was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin, which finally resurfaced after a long period of silence. Based on the acclaimed comic storyline, the game takes place in a future where only one turtle remains. Unlike the colorful and light-hearted tone most people associated with TMNT, The Last Ronin is much darker story centered around revenge, loss, and the final survivor's quest for justice. One of the biggest reasons people are paying attention is the developer. Platinum Games is handling this project, which immediately raises the expectation for the combat. This is the studio behind Bayonetta, Metal Gear Rising, and Nier Automata, making them one of the most respected action game developers in the industry. The trailer itself focused more on atmosphere than gameplay, showcasing a ruined future, New York, and the darker tone that defines the source material. While we still need a proper gameplay showcase before making any major judgments, the combination of a beloved story and Platinum Games expertise makes this one of the more interesting action titles currently in development. The Blood of Dawnwalker continues to be one of the most interesting RPGs shown during SGF, developed by Rebel Wolves, a studio founded by former Witcher 3 developers. The game follows Coin, a man caught between humanity and vampirism in a dark fantasy version of 14th century Europe. What makes Dawnwalker stand out is that we have already seen substantial gameplay. Rebel Wolves has showcased combat, exploration, vampire abilities, and details about the game's unique time system. The story unfolds over 30 days and 30 nights, but instead of constantly pushing players forward with a ticking clock, time advances through major decisions and quest progression. It's a smart way to create urgency without discouraging exploration. The SGF trailer also introduced a few new mysteries. It begins in a way that makes you think you are watching something completely different before revealing the medieval empire setting at the heart of the game. That twist, combined with the strong premise and talent behind the project, suggests that there is more to this world that initially meets the eye. If Rebel Wolves can deliver on the idea they have shown so far, this could easily become one of the standard RPGs of this year. One of the most surprising announcements of SGF came from Shift Up, which officially revealed Stellar Blade Blood Rain. After the success of the original, most people expected the studio to continue expanding the franchise. What nobody knew was exactly how they planned to do it. Blood Rain answered that question by introducing new standalone adventures set in the same universe while shifting focus away from Eve, the protagonist from the first game. That decision immediately became one of the biggest talking points surrounding the reveal. Eve quickly became one of gaming's most recognizable new characters, so introducing a completely new lead was always going to generate discussions among fans. Beyond that conversation, though, the gameplay looks good. If there's one thing Shift Up clearly understand, it's what players enjoy most about the original game. Fast combat, flashy combos, fluid movements, and massive boss encounters were all front and center throughout the trailer. In many ways, this action looked even more ambitious than before. This doesn't feel like a small follow up designed to capitalize on the first game's success. It feels like Shift Up is actively trying to turn Stellar Blade into a much larger franchise, and based on what was shown, they seem to have the ambition to do exactly that. There are still plenty of questions surrounding the story, the structure of the game, and how much it differs from the original experience. We also need to see a proper gameplay deep dive before making any major conclusions. But as a first reveal, Blood Rain accomplished exactly what it needed to do. It reminded players why they enjoyed Stellar Blade in the first place, while showing enough new ideas and larger scale action to make the future of the franchise look very promising. The moment Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced appears on the screen, fans immediately knew what they were looking at. More than a decade after its original release, Black Flag is still widely regarded as one of the best games in the franchise, thanks to its mix of naval exploration, pirates adventure, and one of Ubisoft's most memorable protagonists. The trailer showcased upgraded visuals, improved environmental details, updated character models, and a far more impressive version of the Caribbean than what was possible on older hardware. But beyond the visual improvements, it was a reminder of just how strong the original game was. Even today, sailing across the ocean, hunting enemy ships, and boarding vessels remain one of the most unique and satisfying gameplay loops Ubisoft has ever created. The biggest challenge facing the remake isn't proving that Black Flag was a great game. We already know that. The challenge is modernizing the experience without losing what made it special in the first place. Players will be expecting improvements to controls, mission designs, and several mechanics that have inevitably aged over the years. If Ubisoft can strike that balance, Resynced has the potential to introduce one of Assassin's Creed's most beloved adventures to an entirely new generations of players while giving long-term fans a reason to return to it once again. Square Enix had the responsibility of closing SGF, and they did it with what was arguably the biggest announcement of the entire showcase. The final reveal of the night was Final Fantasy VII Revelation, the third and final chapter in the remake trilogy that began back in 2020. Fans have spent years wondering how Square Enix would conclude one of gaming's most ambitious remake projects. And based on this first trailer, the studio is aiming to end things on a massive scale. The reveal was packed with fan favorite moments. We got our first major look at the Highwind, one of the most iconic airships in gaming history, along with glimpses of new regions, weapon class threats, and appearances from characters like Vincent Valentine and Sid. More importantly, the trailer emphasized the scale, making Revelation feels like the natural evolution of everything established in both remake and rebirth. That was probably the biggest takeaway. While remake focused heavily on Midgar and rebirth expanded the world beyond the city, Revelation set to take things even further with larger environment, more exploration, and greater freedom for players. Square Enix has also confirmed a spring 2027 release window for PS5, Xbox Series X and S, PC, and Nintendo Switch 2, making it the widest launch in the trilogy history. The developers have stated that combat has been further refined with a new job system, expanded party customization, and additional flexibility built on top of the hybrid real-time battle system from the previous games. What impressed me most though was the confidence of the trailer. Square Enix clearly understand what this game represents. This isn't just another sequel, it's the finale of a project that fans have been following for years, and expectation couldn't be any higher. The other thing working in Revelation's favor is the uncertainty surrounding the story. Remake and Rebirth have already changed major events and introduced new mysteries, meaning even longtime fans don't know exactly how this version of Final Fantasy VII will end. By the time the trailer ended, it was obvious why Square Enix was chosen to close the show. SGF featured plenty of major reveals, but Final Fantasy VII Revelation felt like the biggest game in the room. And as a showcase ending announcement, it absolutely delivered. And those were the 10 of the biggest announcements from SGF 2026. Between Veronica, Isolation 2, Revelation, Black Flag, and several promising new projects, this showcase delivered far more major reveals than I expected going in. That said, we are not done yet. There were still plenty of interesting announcements that didn't make it into this video. So if you don't see your favorite reveal here, chances are it's coming in part 2. Let me know which game from today's list impressed you the most, and I'll see you in the next video.
I could do this. I'll make you proud.
Just ain't your day.